The endocrine system. It's completely centered on hormones. So why are hormones needed? Well, for regulation. What it does is there's chemical messages that are sent from one body part to target cells in another body part. Tells it what to do. That communication is needed to coordinate the whole body. So to tell the whole body, hey body, do this. And then also for homeostasis, right? Keeping things an even keel, nice and level, and regulation. Things like metabolism, growth, development, behavior, reproduction, all of those. So there's regulation and communication. Animals rely on two systems for regulation. One is the endocrine system, which we're going to talk about. It's a ductless gland that secretes chemical signals directly into the blood. Those chemicals travel to a target tissue or target cells, and then they enact something there. The endocrine system is for slow, long-lasting, long-term responses. Whereas the nervous system, like we talked about before, has a system of neurons in the central nervous system. And what it does is it transmits an electrical signal to target tissue, and it causes fast, short-lasting responses. So the endocrine system is long-lasting, and the nervous system is short-lasting. Both of them, though, are regulation by chemical messengers. The nervous system uses neurotransmitters that are released by neurons and met by receptor proteins. And then the endocrine system uses hormones that are released by the endocrine glands straight from the blood into the system, and they also meet up with receptor proteins at a target cell. Some quick examples that are not the human system. In butterflies, there's a hormone called ecdysone, which promotes molting and the metamorphosis of larvae. Now, ecdysone is stimulated when it's targeted by brain hormone, which comes from the prothoracic glands. There's also another hormone called juvenile hormone, and that causes larvae to retain their characteristics from as they're developing. Another example is pheromones. Pheromones are hormones that help animals communicate with members of their species and attract the opposite sex. This is somewhat related to why humans wear perfume and cologne, is to mimic pheromones of other creatures. So how do hormones work? Well, the process is they're flowing along in the blood. They affect target cells, so they decide what their target is. So generally speaking, gland X will make hormone Y, and then hormone Y will affect organ Z. So organ Z is the target organ of hormone Y. Generally speaking, they'll use a negative feedback system, which is when an excess of the hormone will shut down production of the hormone. There's also positive feedback. So an example of negative feedback is insulin secreted by the pancreas, and if blood glucose gets too high, the pancreas produces more insulin, which causes cells to use more glucose, so the glucose level declines. So there is already insulin, and then it triggers there to be more insulin. Sorry, it's the glucose level that declines. That's what makes it negative, is we decline the glucose level. But it gets too high, it declines. Positive feedback is estrogen is released, and it stimulates the release of LH, which we'll talk about what that is, which causes further secretion of estrogen. So estrogen causes further secretion of estrogen, more estrogen. Whereas the negative feedback loop, blood glucose too high, we negate the blood glucose level and make it decline. Here's our negative feedback model. If this body condition is high, remember we saw this before on the nervous system. If it's high, then the gland gives off a hormone, lowers the condition. If it's low, gland gives off a different hormone, which raises the condition. So like in the nervous system we talked about, if your body temperature is high, your brain sends nerve signals which causes you to sweat. If it's low, your brain sends nerve signals which cause you to shiver, to warm you up. In the endocrine system, let's say our blood sugar level is high. The pancreas gives off insulin, And then that insulin causes the body cells to take up more sugar from the blood, so it takes it out of the blood, which lowers the blood sugar level. The liver stores sugar and reduces your appetite. Now, if your blood sugar level is low, your pancreas releases glucagon, which means the liver then releases the sugar that it was storing, triggers hunger, says, "I'm hungry," and says, "Eat." So here's the overview. You got your hypothalamus up in your brain, your pituitary gland, little tiny thing, your thyroid and parathyroid in your throat, your pancreas and islets of Langerhans, your adrenal glands, testes in males, and an ovary in females. So first off, the pituitary gland. It is the master gland. It releases many hormones that stimulate other glands to secrete hormones. It has many target organs. It's about the size of a pea up in your brain, about the size of a pea, so it's small, but it controls a lot of different chemicals. There's the anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland, and they each have their own hormones. So the anterior pituitary gland is connected to the brain by the hypothalamus. It's a short stalk. It's linked via the bloodstream there, and the hypothalamus controls the output of hormones. So it'll keep it regulated as far as making sure you don't have too much of a hormone or too little of a hormone in your body. The anterior pituitary gland produces 6 hormones. Those are follicle-stimulating hormones, FSH, which cause the production of estrogen, and in males causes the production of sperm. Then there's LH, the luteinizing hormone, which causes ovulation or synthesizing estrogen, and in males it produces testosterone. There's also the thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, which helps to regulate the thyroid gland and affects metabolism. Then there's the human growth hormone, HGH, or just growth hormone, GH, and that causes growth. Then the adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which stimulates the adrenal cortex and maintains electrolytic homeostasis, so it keeps your electrolyte levels even. It also helps to cope with chronic stress. Then finally there's prolactin, and that stimulates the mammary glands to make milk. It also inhibits ovulation. So the posterior pituitary gland. It is made from neural tissue. So the anterior is connected via blood vessels, and the posterior is connected via neural tissue. So hormones are made in the hypothalamus, but they're stored in the posterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary does not make these hormones, it stores these hormones. The first one is antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. And that one regulates the reabsorption of water by the nephrons in the kidneys. There's also oxytocin, and what that does is it stimulates the contraction of the uterus and milk ejection of mammary glands. So those are the 2 hormones the posterior pituitary gland is responsible for. Here are some little memory tools. First one is the gator pit. Growth hormone, ACTH, thyroid stimulating hormone, oxytocin, and R for antidiuretic hormone. All of those come from the pituitary gland. The first 3, growth, ACTH, and thyroid stimulating, are anterior pituitary gland hormones, and the last 2 are posterior, oxytocin and antidiuretic. Other ones to remember are the other ones that the anterior pituitary gland produces, which are FLAP, FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, LH, the luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. And remember that all of those have to do with the reproductive system. Alright, after the pituitary glands, we end up with the pancreas. So the pancreas produces enzymes that release into the small intestines. Remember we spoke about that in our digestive system. It also secretes 2 hormones. One is called glucagon, and that's the alpha cell. What it does is it stimulates the conversion of glycogen into glucose and raises the blood sugar, so it puts more sugar back into your bloodstream. Its target organ is the liver. Then there's insulin, which is the beta cell. And insulin promotes glucose being turned into glycogen, so it helps to lower your blood sugar. And the target organ there is the liver and the muscle cells. Both of these, glucagon and insulin, are produced in clusters of cells called islets of Langerhans. All right, next we're in the adrenal glands. First, we have the adrenal cortex. That is targeted by the pituitary with ACTH. And it produces, once it's stimulated by ACTH, the adrenal cortex produces glucocorticoids, which help to target the liver. They increase the concentration of glucose and help you adapt to stress. It's also known as cortisol, more glucose, less stress. All right, it also creates mineralocorticoids, which target the kidney and help retain sodium and water in the kidneys. It's also known as aldosterone. Remember that from our nervous system discussion. Actually, excretory system. All right, so after the adrenal cortex, we also have the adrenal medulla, which we call the emergency gland. It produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. That causes your fight or flight response, and it will kick in under extreme stress. It increases your heart rate, your metabolic rate, your blood pressure, and provides quick energy. It's also known as adrenaline. That's all that's produced in the adrenal medulla. Then there's your thyroid. Your thyroid's in your neck, and its target organ It is the target organ of TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, from the pituitary gland. Once it's stimulated by TSH, it produces thyroxine, which stimulates metabolic activities. It also contains iodine, and you'll see how that comes into play in a second. Then a problem with thyroxine is you can have hyperthyroidism, which is there's too much thyroxine, and those people are irritable and nervous. And then there's hypothyroidism, which is too little thyroxine, not enough, and these people are usually sluggish and overweight. In addition to thyroxine, your thyroid also produces calcitonin, which lowers blood calcium by depositing calcium salts in the bones. It's antagonistic to PTH, parathyroid. And we'll talk about what that does in just a second. It does the opposite thing. So, thyroxine contains iodine, and a goiter is a medical condition in which you have an iodine deficiency, so the thyroid enlarges as it tries to produce thyroxine. It's trying, but it doesn't have enough iodine to make enough thyroxine, so it enlarges itself. That is what a goiter is. All right, so parathyroids, there are 4 little pea-shaped organs that are on the thyroid. And they've just got the parathyroid hormone. What it does is the opposite of calcitonin. It increases the concentration of calcium ions by releasing those calcium salts from the bones. So calcitonin builds it up in the bones, and PTH gives it off from the bones. This give and take causes bone remodeling, the building and breaking down of bones to store and release calcium. All right, so more hormones. There's also the sex hormones. There's estrogen, which comes from the ovaries. It causes the development of secondary sex characteristics in women. It also induces the release of the LH that comes from the pituitary gland, and it helps to maintain the endometrium, that's the lining of the uterus. Then there's progesterone, and that helps to regulate the menstrual cycle as well as pregnancy. And then testosterone is what the males have, and that comes from testes, and it stimulates secondary sex characteristics in men, as well as stimulating production of sperm. A few other hormones, the thymus hormone is thymosin, and it develops T cells in the immune system. And then the pineal gland creates melatonin, which is involved in our circadian rhythms, and it's released at night. That's part 1.